So let me just read it and pardon my accent. So if we lose a war, there is the end forever and we disappear from the earth. We intend to remain alive. Our neighbors want us dead. There is no much room for compromise. So this is in the essence is what's happening in Ukraine, just like it is in Israel. So to answer your question, sir, where I'm from, let me show. Can you see the pointer there? Maybe not. Can you see here the pointer? All right, here. Here we go. All right. So this is the map of Ukraine as it is today. So with the red zone, which is being occupied and currently is occupied. The blues areas are liberated from Russians by the Ukrainian forces. And to answer where my family is, it's right, let me point. Here. What's the name of the city? So the city is called Dnipro. Dnipro. It used to be called Dnipropetrovsk. Don't try to pronounce that. The reason they changed the name, this I think is relevant. Dnipropetrovsk. Dnipro is the name of the river, of that big river that you see going through the whole country. And Petrovsk was the name of the Russian Soviet leader who was one of the initiator of the Great Hunger and the starvation of Ukrainians. So recently, when Ukraine is trying to break off the Russian heritage, they dropped the name Petrovsk. So right now it's just Dnipro. This is just a curious fact. Ukraine is pretty much the same size as Texas. Same population. Pre-war, it was 55 million, and now it's probably down to 30 million. The geography is very similar. In the south, they have the body of water. They have Great Plains, and I will show you in a moment. I was raised at the Great Plains of Ukraine. So West Texas is like second home because I'm used to it. So this is my little town where I grew up. And just out of curiosity, this is the southernmost forest in Ukraine. And you can see behind the river, there are those 9-story buildings that they're typical for the post-Soviet countries. It's important for me to point to those, they're not high rises, but 9-story buildings. They're apartment buildings. I was raised in one of those. And please look at one of them. In 2 slides, you will see what happens when Russians come. Behind the town are the Great Plains. Those are the plains that were ruled by the Ukrainian Cossacks. So Cossacks are part of Ukrainian history that is actively used by the Russians, like they are Russian warriors, but in fact, they are Ukrainians. They're part of Ukrainian history. Excuse me. So this is the text from my parents. And please look at the date. It's February 24th, 2022. So I typically get up at 4 a.m. and this is the first thing that I see on my WhatsApp. And it says, we're fine, don't worry. So this is Thursday. And I don't get texts from my parents on Thursdays. So that's how I learned about the start of the war. And if you can read Cyrillic alphabet, you may notice that this is written in Russian. So I'm from Russian-speaking family. And if someone wants to ask a question whether the reason for the war was oppression of the Russian-speaking population, please feel free to ask this question. I'm happy to answer. So this is the 9-story building, which is exactly 2 miles from my medical school. So I spent 7 years in my medical school and my residency and then in fellowship. So anti-ship missile hit the 9-story building, hit 60 people, killed 60 people. So There are a number of questions that people have these days, and I think it is very reasonable to ask those questions, but with only condition. I encourage people to look for answers, not just ask questions, because very often the questions are asked rhetorically, like implying the answer. But no, please find the answer. So what is the underlying reason for the war? How does that affect us here in the States? I think all of those are good questions. How do we end the war? And the last one is just one of the examples. Should we keep paying for the war? And the way this question is formulated is manipulative, as you can see. Right? So should we support the war? Should we keep paying for the war? It's another way to ask this question is, should we support people fighting for their lives? Should we support people fighting for the Western civilization? And but many people choose to ask the question this way: should we keep paying for the war? So we just finished the election cycle, and there was a lot of rhetoric. And of course, this is a hot topic, the war in Europe, and a lot of rhetoric was used for political reasons, and that's fine. Everyone is entitled to use rhetoric the way they want. People say, well, don't look at the rhetoric, look at the actions. But I think the rhetoric matters. So recently, the podcasts are super popular, and you probably know this guy. His name is Joe Rogan. He's one of the most popular podcasters in the world, probably the most famous. And I like the guy. I really like the guy. I think he's very personable, very likable person, and he's an excellent interviewer. He, however, how to say, not very selective, or maybe he's selective with his guests, and he became a magnifier for some of the controversial, in my mind, opinions about what's happening in Europe and in Ukraine. And the general message is we don't need to get involved. This is not our war. And this is the mild way to put this. Many people will start actively blaming Ukraine for starting the war. Many people will start retranslating Russian propaganda. So there's a lot of confusion in the public domain these days, what's true, what's not true. And the word that comes to my mind is isolationism. And don't get me wrong, everyone is has the right to have their opinion. So isolationism is not something new in these American histories. So there's a big group of people who promote isolationism. This is in another different opinion, which comes from one of my patients who says, I actually get asked about my parents, about Ukraine a lot from my patients. And after a brief exchange, he says, yeah, maybe it's better to send money than troops. So maybe this actually is a good investment if we support them monetarily, not sending our people there. So several things are important to remember from history. Number one, both world wars started in, not just in Europe, but in Eastern Europe. The first one started in the Austria-Hungary Empire and led to its collapse. The second one started when Czechoslovakia at that point was invaded by Germany. And it was widespread. I'm not sure how widespread, but there was a sentiment that we should stay out of the world affairs, right? And let me read some of these banners. So Hitler has not attacked us. Why attack Hitler? I think it's reasonable. Putin has not attacked us. Why do we need to mess with Putin, right? Why not peace with Hitler? Change the name. Europe for Europeans, America for Americans. It's okay. Here's another one that I like even more. Arm Britain and prolong the war. Right? So the same sentiment as I expressed before. Why do we need to fund the war? Reasonable question. But let's also find the answer. So Lend-Lease, lose lives. I mean, nothing new, right? 80 years ago, 85 years ago, same sentiment. So, I mean, we can try and stay out of this, but guess what? We'll be pulled in this. Okay. So, Pearl Harbor, more recent events, right? So we can try and stay away from this, but it will come to us. If we're not proactive, they will find us. And we'll be pulled in this. Now, when there's a chance for us to support our allies to fight for us, why not do that? Why do we need to get to D-Day? Or Afghanistan or Iraq? And sometimes we will win, but sometimes we'll lose. So why do we need to wait and to get to that? Why don't be proactive and stay away from that? So there's a number of great thinkers and philosophers, and this is the first QR code, and I highly recommend that you listen to this gentleman if you don't know him, Stephen Kotkin. So he is an American historian, and his specialty is Russia. He wrote several volumes on Joseph Stalin, and he understands what's going on over there, and his view of the world aligns with mine. So here's a great thought from him. So the strength and greatness of the United States is based on two things that as he puts it: our democratic institutions, which balance themselves, and strength of our allies. So we do win wars. We have won wars. And when we win wars, the places that we held thrive. The places that Russia wins or China wins, that's what happens to them, right? So I love this satellite image of the Korean Peninsula at night, right? So tell me where the American side, where the Russian side is. When Russia wins wars, they create armies. When America wins wars, we create businesses. What else is there to prove? Now, we are superpower, and the last 80 years has been great because we projected power to the world. But we're not the only one who wants to play in this sandbox, right? So China wants to project power. And now the confusing part to me is we're trying to pull out of the world. We try to pull out our influence, but these guys don't. And they use both brutal power and use soft power, meaning that they invest in other economies. They will promote their culture. Guess what? It costs money. And so we can talk, and I do not disagree about the corruption and USAID, but let's not, correct me, throw baby with the dirty water. Russia is trying to play along with China. They try to present themselves as the global player. So this map here is map in 2021, right? So before the big war started in Ukraine. And those are pieces and parts of the former Soviet republics when they instill their governments, when they invade and they create, through those metastases, they create the zones of influence in those countries. But they're not just looking at the post-Soviet countries. They are looking globally. So the current narrative here in the States goes like this. We do not want Russia to side with China. We'd rather have Russia side with us. So we are going to negotiate with Russia, trying to present, I don't know, whatever, to them good deal so that they don't look towards China. That's the argument. Well, we've been there. These guys somehow don't study history. So this is the second QR code. This is an excellent interview with Richard Nixon, and I'm not talking about personalities. You may or may not like Nixon and all the scandals and this and that, but This man answers one question posed by the interviewer. Can the Russians be trusted? And he says directly, they are liars and cheaters. Don't think that you will outsmart them. You're dealing with KGB. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't deal with them, but remember that they're liars and cheaters. You think that you will pull them to our side? Good luck. I think this is one of the basic questions of what started the war. And I don't know if you heard the president yesterday who said that Ukraine should have not started the war. Right?
Yes.
Now, I will show several faces and names. Their basic argument is Russia started the war because of NATO expansion. And the Russians were promised that NATO will not expand 1 inch to the east, and we did not hold to our promises. So some of these people that I'm going to show their faces, they confuse reason and an excuse. Because the Russians, they are great manipulators. They will give you any excuse in the world why they're right. So let's not forget. John Mearsheimer, he is a prominent political scientist from the University of Chicago. He is self-proclaimed realist, right? So there is this part of political science called realism. So if you search for his name, his lecture from 2016, I think, is called Why the War in Ukraine is the West Fault. So that is exactly his argument, that we did not hold the promise and we expanded NATO, and that's why Russia had to fight back. This gentleman went even further, and he wrote this book called Provoked, Scott Horton. Amazing gentleman. I highly recommend to listen to him, and I have one of the links here. So the same argument. Now, there's one counter argument for some reason, these people ignore. And guess what? This counter argument comes from this gentleman here called Vladimir Putin. So in the interview with Tucker Carlson, he spent 30 minutes explaining the historic reasons why Ukraine belongs to Russia. Now, Dr. Mearsheimer acknowledges that this one of the arguments, one side of the argument saying that this is colonial war, that Russia is just trying to grab the land. But then he says there is no evidence of that. Here we go. Listen to Putin. He's telling you, we have the rights to Ukraine. Now, I'm not going to go into the political or to the historical references and all of that. Happy to discuss that, by the way, because I'm pretty good in Ukrainian and Eastern European history. But that is his reason for the war. He just wants to capture Ukraine, and not just capture Ukraine. He wants to get rid of Ukrainian culture, or keep it as that funny villager culture. Back to the same interview of Richard Nixon. So the argument that it is the West's fault that we provoked the Russians to become who they are is not new. This didn't start with Mearsheimer or Tucker Carlson. This interview was recorded, when was that? In the 70s, I guess. So let me just read this for you. So the interviewer is asking, so we acted vindictively towards the Russians and that pushed them to become who they are. In effect, we created the Cold War by our paranoia and our anti-communist Red Scare fears. Okay, so Nixon then responds, the idea that we caused them to be aggressive and adventurous as they are. They did not need any help from us. That's who they are. They are barbarians. They're brutal culture. I'll show you in a second who they are. Another great debate on Piers Morgan between Scott Horton, the guy who wrote Provoked book, and the General Wesley Clark. Not more to say. Please find and watch. It's this is amazing how they can be confronted with the proper view. Another great program, Alexander Stubb, currently, so he is a professor of political sciences in Finland, and currently he is a Finnish president. And so he is addressing all of those arguments coming from John Mearsheimer. Also, what's important is not only know arguments, counter arguments, what the propaganda says, but also it's important to know why people say what they say. And here is another, there are another two links, how the KGB and the Russians were able to influence the left part of the spectrum, the right part of the spectrum. They use different narratives for each one of them, worth watching. And these two videos dissect, let's say, the great intellectual of our time, Noam Chomsky. Just an example of why does he side with Russia? Well, because America is evil, right? And everyone who is fighting America and its allies should be good, right? So that's his argument. Well, the argument from the right is, we need to focus more on our internal problems. We should not spend money outside, you know, and then they will also add some nonsense like biolaboratories in Ukraine, Nazis in Ukraine. So worth watching. So how do we end the war? Great question. There are some easy ways. Okay? And the easiest way comes from Ronald Reagan. And this speech was recorded in 1964 for a minute. So let me read this for you. So now let's set the record straight. There is no argument over the choice between peace and war. But there is only one guaranteed way you can have peace. And you can have it in the next second. Guess what it is? Surrender. There's the argument I heard on TV yesterday. Why did you start fighting the Russians? What's the alternative? A little quiz. Tell me what you think. Who said this? So the government is making money on war. Second one, to stop the war, at least one side should stop shooting. I mean, okay. And regarding negotiations, so every war ends with negotiations, right? So from this person, there was the argument. Let's listen to their demands. Let's tell them what we want, and let's meet in the let's find the middle ground. So who do you think said that? Okay, that's a good guess. Vladimir Zelensky. He was elected a president in 2019, and he won with a landslide, 73%. A very successful comedian and actor who was playing a Ukrainian president in a very popular TV series. So simple solutions is what people like, right? So promise them simple solutions and they will vote for you. I didn't vote for him. I hold dual citizenship. I did not vote. But if you ask me what I think about him today, he is the president. He is the president. So, and he learned it the hard way. You can't negotiate with the Russians. So this was a video recorded second or third night after the big invasion. And it's him and his administration, this president administration, they are outside of the president building compound. And they say, this was a hugely motivating video. And he says, we did not run. I'm here, my cabinet is here, my office is here. We're fighting for the capital because the Russians were advancing on Kyiv. And this is the video when he famously said, "I don't need a ride, I need ammo." So I think this is a reasonably famous photo, right? Lyndon Johnson and Robert McNamara are thinking hard how to get out of the mess that is happening in Vietnam. And smart people, right? So Harvard Business School graduate, Robert McNamara. I was listening to his interview this morning. Amazingly smart person. There are no simple solutions. There are no simple solutions. I think it's worth understanding, not just looking in the eyes of Putin, but also listening to the Ukrainians and see why they're fighting. And the argument that we are being presented time and time again, a lot of people are dying, a lot of people are dying, a lot of people are dying. Yes, it's a horrible thing, but that's not the only thing that people are fighting for, right? So they're fighting for their lives. They're fighting for their national identity. And I don't have to explain here in Texas what identity means, right? So don't mess with Texas. Now, when the war started, and that's, let me digress a little bit. My mom was she's like the most, the nicest person ever who hasn't cursed in her life, I think, a single time. And when the war started, people were so angry, so frustrated that there was your first words all over Ukraine on billboards. This was like almost like official language. And so when you say don't mess with taxes, they use much harsher words. And this was a very unique, uniting moment. So national identity matters. Political identity also matters. What do I mean by political identity? You should go to Russia to feel absence of freedom was the opposite of that. You step outside of the train in Russia and you see the cops everywhere with AK-47s looking at you. Their border patrol will not say welcome to Russia. They will look at you and they will see if they want to arrest you. They have oligarchy, they have corruption, they have brutality, all of that. When you go to Ukraine, you feel just like here. No one cares. You have friendly police. You have yes, of course. Who doesn't have corruption, right? So it's not just national identity; it's also political identity in the squares during the Revolution of Dignity. A lot of people who are Russian speakers. Let me tell you about that. Every morning I start with Zoom meeting with Ukraine because I work on that project that I told you about, medical education, the troops. And we recognize openly that we are from Russian-speaking regions and everyone speaks Ukrainian. It's like code. So identity matters. My wife is from Ukrainian-speaking family. When I met her and married her, for years, we've been talking Russian. When this started, she says, no more Russian in this house. So the only people I speak Russian to are my parents. I don't even have Russian keyboard on my laptop. So to the topic of brutality. You might have heard about the city of Mariupol, which was captured within the first few days. This is a drama theater in Mariupol. And then on both sides of the building, you see the word "Дети," which is written in Russian, which means children. And they wrote it in huge letters so that the Russian pilots can see it. Let's look at their eyes. Let's see what they think, okay? Let's negotiate with them. This is a screenshot of a promotional video for the Ukrainian armed forces. And you can see what it says. None of us was born for war. Ukraine has the biggest army in Europe, of course, over 1 million. So the last time I went home to see my parents there, I see them every year because we go to Europe. So we kind of pull them out of Ukraine to have some rest from the air raids and sirens. But my son and I went to visit my hometown 6 months prior to the beginning of the war. And this is the river that you saw on the one of the first pictures. And, you know, it's just like here. You go to the river, to the rivers, you go to the mountains, you rent a kayak. Had a lot of fun with my son. Same thing as here, right? Kids running around, smiling, and since 2014, after the Revolution of Dignity, when it was a very significant blow to the Russian dominance in Ukraine, they took off. You know, the free economy is amazing. The businesses and they decentralized the funds, and the local governments started building squares like this. So I could see the transformation in front of my eyes. It's one of those apartments. Right? You can see this is a civilized apartment. It's a small apartment in one of the largest cities in Ukraine, and there are videos on the internet from birthday for one of the daughters of the family, and they celebrate in this very distinct yellow color kitchen, and then you see this, and they die. So I was going to end my presentation with this. This is a quote from Dante: "The hottest place in hell is reserved for those who in times of great moral crisis maintain their neutrality." But this is not the slide that I want to end with. This is the slide I want to end with. This is a map of Europe in 1938. When Hitler was saying, "Just give me the Sudetenland," this strip of land in Czechoslovakia with German minority, just give it to me. That's all I have. I welcome any of your comments. Yes. Out of sight, out of mind. So, ma'am. Yes, the question is, what can we do, us ordinary Americans who agree with everything that I just presented? So, our good friends Israelis are very instrumental keeping the agenda and keeping the conflict in front of our eyes. And I applaud them for that. And I think that we need to learn. I think the burden of keeping this in the agenda of the media, to a large degree, the burden is on the Ukrainian American community. And we're talking constantly with organizations, our central organizations in DC, but also what I'm doing now, right now, in this minute is, I think is very important for people in the little towns and cities to do, and keep the conversation going. The thing is, it is not difficult to convince people of this view. as long as you get to talk about that. Most people and most of my patients, and of course there is bias, and of course, you know, whomever doesn't agree with this, just don't come forward. But I hear a lot of support from people who know that Ukraine is actually a real person, right? There are the same Westerners as we are here in the States. The question is, let me bounce the question back to you. How can we have the conversation going? I think this is the most important part. If you have the conversation going, you still see the national flags on the poles next to our American flag and the national flags of Israel. It warms my heart every time I see that, because yes, we don't just care about us here in our little home. We care about our bigger civilization that is the best thing that ever happened to this land. I truly believe that the Western civilization is the best thing that we've developed. And but if we don't have the conversation going, we only hear those information bites from Tucker Carlson and as such, unfortunately. We don't have any opposing views.
Voting block. So the American Jewish community get that. Can we do something to help them get?
I think being vocal is super important. Whomever has connections. My good friends gave me a suggestion of how I can make this presentation. If someone has connections with the Avalanche Journal, with KCBD, if someone knows Jody Arrington, if any kinds of connection matters. I think personal conversations are super important. Super important.
Is that when we were in Ukraine, State University, and it was such a cool, they were still,
When was that? In 01. Mm. So the question is, what happens to Ukraine if, I'd rather say when, it wins, whether it will be able to financially pull out of this and rebuild the economy. So there is more than one way of doing that. And investments from the West is the surest way, the Marshall Plan, as it was implemented after World War II. The recent negotiations or conversation about the rare minerals in Ukraine, I think, is one of those things. So there are ways. The free markets have amazing ability to rebuild themselves with one important condition: security. Security. And when we talk about the fair end of the war, it's not enough to just stop shooting. You also need to guarantee that it's not going to happen again. And I'm happy to discuss, pros and cons of Ukraine joining NATO. There are several arguments. I know why yes, why no, but in the view of Ukrainians is that NATO is the best security guarantee possible, and from our standpoint here in the West, it may be the cheapest way to provide them with that security. Ukraine gave up the third largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in 1994, December 1994, 30 years ago, and was not strong enough to demand stronger security guarantees at that point. That's why we. So yes. And I really appreciate it. One of my said people and find but part when we are, I live here. My wife and I stay here. That's what we live here. Look around my home. People are keep their mind, feel like back. So yeah. Well, contact, black, with block, and but great. And the other side of legs without so still good. It's still good. The Russian yeah. So, so this was way several parts holding on the there's another part of this
It won't stop. They're with the negotiating part, so things.
No. To step up to the plate.
There are several theories about that. I do not agree. Eggs, like spot is so big that there part of the people can kill it and the style and people can that is getting for each like a completely some style I like what the is to add and if we can talk about the it's how you hold the line safe and those who have other side and so each and I don't say for each one who five running soldiers this tells you about productions towards like not just service but they there's some claim in the west right so it has uh, an argument between and there in either are colors, not uh, it, it, one, but not the eight colors. Kindergarten. So, and now uh, well, uh, so, so I cannot when it was stuff that's not the negative response, skeptical response. So put forward you can put in, uh, if you get some of the speakers in the they say that in oh um, it, free, it, right instead of but what but yes. Right. So sure. And one who fighters and two and for one insect you with one like and that is where uh, what yeah, they are uh, they're totally good people people who got in touch with and they brought to the man that they had enough. So this American person brought the father of the family, the person and his family to do it. So the person actually played for my class and said, I need either one can I stay with you? So no, so this like, yes. And, I think. Yeah. If say the market definitely markets in what so I don't so I in so, and in my mind and from what and not so protect no and and like but that fine. So no so what I do uh, uh, if this part compared to to then that 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 so in the way would and in so there's part And that was not the first time. Say, Spain. With every 8 states over with so eight in before the started in the have you heard of no. This in how it made not the part of that if you are and what is the plan? What is the plan? What is the plan? So I think that's excellent. So in my mind, the plan is trying to get as much as we can. So you can see runs and why and see back where so is it is so probably like way from you say we have need to make money or not, but they pay attention to what's happening here. So and they have this gap and they have this little circle month and so that is their plan. First plan is so that but see with the but you give them so when say the rhetoric there is not a single piece of rhetoric. You should not have started with one, but it goes like this. You cannot start it both with Russia, Russia never lost. Or like all stuff. Yeah, they can work. They claim that they want to time and time again. I think concern. Yes. So the question was he so the question was what you think just like plans for a lot of spectrum. And there's no did you want yeah. So it's what event but design allow for that's one. Second part is per yeah. But it's not big stage steps of that stuff. But it's still very close. I don't but uh what you so if or we the X something in the end of the day it because it are and they expect us to do there is always a success story. You can wait. You there all of those special rails to this use every step, you know, you know, slide line. So that's nonetheless, you define your confidence in on So I would say because unlike so I give the example. Same thing happens. If speak as ugly as it is, unfortunately, that's not they want of course strong